Prendiamo posto, possiamo...
I would ask everyone to take their seats, please. This way we can begin our session. This is the fourth session of the conference, and we'll be discussing the Libyan crisis in this session. I would like to ask those of you who wish to participate in this session to stand up when it is your time to speak during the debate. And please remember to hand in your request for the floor, because once we see how many people wish to participate, we'll be able to determine the time allotted to each of you. We are running late. We are behind schedule. However, we believe we'll be able to conclude this session as scheduled. I will begin by saying that there are many important reasons for Europe why we've decided to have a session on the Libyan crisis in our conference. Among other things, we have to assess together how our parliaments might support Mr. Bernardino Leon, the UN Special Envoy for Libya, how we can support him in his valuable work. Of course, he is facing a huge number of difficulties in this effort. Right after the Supreme Court ruling yesterday invalidating the June 25th elections, the situation became worse. Mr. Leon, of course, had to quickly go to Libya, which is why he is unable to be here today. We were able to speak on the phone, and together we decided that we would have the session nonetheless. In Libya today, there seems to be a paralysis. The institutions are powerless, and national security is on the verge of collapse. The Supreme Court ruling invalidating the elections makes the situation ever more difficult. And in any case, it opens up a new scenario in that crisis. The court's decision has resulted in some preliminary varied reactions. We think that one must be prudent while awaiting more information which can help us understand why this decision has been handed down by the court. But one thing is definitely clear. These new developments have to make the international community and Europe, first and foremost, ever more determined in demanding a ceasefire, in setting up humanitarian corridors, and in revitalizing a political dialogue. A military solution for the crisis is unacceptable today, even more so than yesterday. What is Libya today? It is a country that is strongly divided. It has made it through a revolution, but unfortunately, the war has not disappeared. The parties that won the elections that have now been invalidated control the cities of Tobruk and Beida in the east of the country. And those that have not acknowledged the elected government control Tripoli and Benghazi, and they are fighting against General Haftar. And there are some areas in the west that are under the control of the Zintan militia groups, and the south is primarily under the control of local militia groups. Now, this is a quick snapshot of the situation. And I want to make sure that we all perfectly understand how complex the situation is. These difficulties will be overcome only if the Libyans take ownership in the political process. They all must participate. Most Libyans want a united country. No one is strong enough on the ground to be able to control the country on their own, even with support from the outside. The likelihood that Libya becomes a failed state with the obvious spillovers for the entire region is something that is unacceptable for us. We are aware of the possible consequences of the crisis, the spread of jihadist extremism, and we know that it has already made it to the eastern border of along the border with Egypt, and this could also result in a loss of control of the borders in connection with migration, in particular along the southern border with Sahel, and we know that this would also open up the borders to transit of terrorists and arms and goods trafficking. And of course, there could also be consequences in terms of access to energy resources. So these are all factors that jeopardize the entire quadrant and the security of the European Union itself. And if Libya is so important for Europe, then Europe is just as important for Libya, even more so than its neighboring countries. In this connection, I would like to say something parenthetically. In all our conferences, we've been discussing the criticalities, the sensitivities that have hindered the European integration process of defense and the establishment of an effective common foreign and security policy. We are aware of these difficulties. However, and I'm not being rhetorical here, the two crises that we are discussing, the one in Ukraine and even more so, the one in Libya, might be an opportunity for us to make a quality leap. And I'm sure you'll remember, because you were there, many of you were there, in Vilnius in December 2013. We were discussing some common approaches in our foreign policies, which could be important in certain areas or in certain emergencies, and which would help us to progressively move on towards a common foreign and defense policy. Therefore, what needs to be done? Well, I think that our priority is to focus on a national reconciliation process and a nation-building process. The Libyan crisis is deep-seated. And we know, unfortunately, that the West has to pay for some of the mistakes that it has made. It is commonly believed, and we discuss this also in our meetings, that in the post-Gaddafi period, it would have been better for NATO forces to stay in that country. These forces could have helped the new government to establish national security forces and to disarm the militia groups. No matter what we believe, to stabilize the political situation in Libya is indeed a top priority for Europe. And peace and security in Libya are prerequisites for stability all over North Africa and throughout the Mediterranean. The West and all of us, the European Union, don't have much time to act. And that is why the efforts being made by Mr. Leon, the UN envoy for Libya, need to be supported strongly, and all the indications that are handed down need to be implemented as quickly as possible. We know that to initiate a nation-building process followed by a state-building process is not an easy task. And in the current situation, while awaiting to have a better understanding of the new action that might be needed, I think that we've got to confirm at least two things. The first is that the international community must know how to act if it wants to be effective. It must act in a unitary manner. Under Resolution number 2174 of August 27th, 2014. And also in light of the principles and the agreements stipulated during the more recent meetings, in particular the one held in New York and the one in Madrid. Furthermore, and I'm being very sincere here, hopefully over the next few hours and days, we'll be able to react in a unitary manner to the ruling, and I mean in particular the partners that are directly involved in the Libya dossier. So in addition to Italy, and together with Hungary and Malta, we are the only countries that still have open embassies there. So in addition to these three countries, we've got Great Britain, Germany, Spain, the United States, and the UN. So hopefully, in the next few hours, these countries will be able to determine a unitary reaction to the ruling of the Supreme Court. And the second fact is this: a joint declaration of the governments of France, Italy, Germany, the UK, and the US condemning the violence in Libya and demanding an immediate ceasefire must be supported. This declaration, therefore, must be supported as per Resolution 2174 by ordering individual sanctions against those who threaten peace, stability, and security in Libya, or sanctions against those who oppose or who try to sabotage the political process because they say that today we cannot have a military solution for the Libyan crisis. So in this connection, it will be very important to adopt these sanctions, to order them, to make sure that there will be no veto blocking them in the UN. Stabilizing Libya at the present time seems to be very difficult, and for some it appears to be impossible. But we mustn't give up in Europe, and we must be on the front line in trying to defeat the more radical, the more extreme positions that exist in all the warring factions there. And we need to stop any action that might hinder the political process that is being pursued by the UN envoy. To wrap up, I think that our European parliamentary diplomacy, in line with government policies and with the Commission, and we heard from the High Representative yesterday, she expressed some very important concepts and principles, and I think we all embrace those. So as I said, we've got to act with unity, in a unitary manner, because this is how we think we can make a contribution. I believe we've got some requests now, so how many minutes each? 3 minutes each. Okay, so I think that we can give you each 3 minutes. We'll begin with Belgium. Mr. Van der Meulen. No, Ana Maria Gomez will have the floor now.
Mr. Chairman, I've been the Standing Rapporteur of the European Parliament on Libya since 2010. I was appointed at the days of Gaddafi, when there was a major crisis with 400 Eritreans that Gaddafi wanted to let loose to die in the desert. And there was a major outcry in Europe. And that's when I came in, and my first visit to Libya was actually at the days of Gaddafi in a delegation led by Antonio Panzeri. Then I went to Libya in the middle of the revolution in May 2011, 1 week before Lady Ashton. And it was very important to go there because I saw with my own eyes that indeed this was a people's revolution. It was being aided by NATO, definitely, but it was no invasion of Iraq. It was a people's revolution. The people were there in the front line fighting with whatever they could. I've been there at that time in Ashdabia, about 160 kilometers south of Benghazi. Since then, I've been going there regularly. And I must say that what is happening now in Libya is a major European failure. We were the ones who should have acted to support the Libyan authorities that came out after the revolution. We had the means, we had more knowledge than anybody, few knowledge, we had to build on it, but we completely squandered that. And our member states have tremendous responsibility on that because they actually prevented, coordinated, really, truly European action on Libya. The European Parliament, since the first resolution that was adopted 10th of March 2011, at the beginning of the revolution, so less than a month after the revolution, the European Parliament called for immediate talks with whatever was emerging, the CNT at that time. We didn't know what it was, but also called for a proper CSDP mission. And we should have had a CSDP mission to actually coordinate our efforts in the crucial question of security sector reform and DDR, disarmament. Because it was obvious that there could be no real security and no real governance in Libya if the security would be, and the insecurity would be in the hands of the militia. It was a matter of time that these militias would be infiltrated by all sorts of criminal networks, and of course of terrorist networks, as it is the case today. And it is outrageous, indeed, how we completely neglected that. I recall that in the Paris conference, where there was a division of labor internationally, the EU was content to be in charge of, I remember, civil society, communication, and border security. Can we deliver border security if there is no central command of security? Because there was none. The armed forces and the police in Libya were a fiction. The name of the game of Gaddafi was actually to prevent any kind of governance structure, including the armed forces. So we really had to, if we wanted to do border security, and this was the obsession of our member states, and in particular some of them, and in particular, I must say, Italy, with good reasons, of course, then we had to consider, indeed, helping build capacities in a central command structure. When we sent the UBAM late there, but the UBAM was obviously not going to deliver, because how could it deliver on border security? And I've talked to our people who were doing as much as they could, indeed imparting their knowledge for the border control, maritime and land. But if indeed there was no structure of command, the people with whom they were engaging would immediately be assigned to other jobs that had no connection with the use of that knowledge. So I agree with you now, the situation is terrible. I agree with you that there is no military solution, but make it clear that indeed whatever is going to be necessary will include some kind of military support, at least in the training. And it's not training in Britain or offshore, it's training there in Libya. And at some point, if we don't want, indeed, the situation not even get worse than it is, and I can give you, but I don't have time, I realize, many more examples how we completely neglected and misled the whole thing, especially considering also the center of weapons that Libya had become, and how these weapons are now everywhere. There is no military solution, it's political, and I commend the effort. There is there has to be also a military component, and it's our job because it's our security that is at stake.
Grazie.
Thank you. Monsieur Fromion. Thank you very much, Chairman. First of all, allow me to say that I fully support your remarks and your proposals to try and seek a solution in Libya. I too went to Libya towards the end of the revolution. I met the president of the National Transition Council, and at the time we observed that Libyans did not seem to be willing to control their borders or their territory. In Libya, as we know, people can count on oil reserves that are a source of income. Now, we should maybe make these people more aware of their responsibilities. We supported the movements that brought about the end of dictatorship, but now the Libyans have freedom, and they have to take their fate in their own hands and not just count on the international community. I believe that at a certain point the international community could say, well, it's time for you to take ownership of the situation. You have oil resources that serve you well. You mentioned sanctions, but one could also imagine, Mr. Chairman, that if the oil resources were not so abundantly forthcoming, and if the Libyans were made aware of the impatience that is spreading, I'm thinking of the Chadian soldiers who are dying because, as we know, Libya is a transit country for all sorts of trafficking. And so maybe would it be possible for us to tell the Libyans, unless you stop this fighting as spoilt children do, given the fact that they have these oil resources, gradually they might have to come to terms with the fact that these could be limited somewhat. They have to face their own responsibilities, in other words. Thank you. Over to Mr. Gapes, UK.
Thank you. I want to talk about the wider implications of what is going on in Libya. We saw last year the destabilization in Mali and the impact of people who had been working for the Gaddafi regime, who went from Libya into Mali, and the consequences of that are still with us, in terms of the French intervention, the EU training mission, and what is potentially a long-term commitment to the government in Mali. We have seen terrorist attacks in Algeria on a BP gas facility. Hostages were taken. We have seen the impact on Tunisia economically and also with some terrorist actions. And if we as Europeans, who after all were the people who intervened to save lives and stop the massacres in Benghazi, which were threatened when Gaddafi said he would go house by house and kill the people like rats, we intervened. And the United States led from behind. And so, in a sense, we are responsible for what is the situation in Libya, but we also have to be realistic about what we can and what we can't do. We may wish to train Libyan armed forces, but as we have seen this week in the UK, even if you try to train them away from Libya, there can be problems. And so, I think we need to be realistic about this. Some of the neighbors of Libya or other Arab countries have also decided that this is a threat. The Egyptians and the Egyptians and the United Arab Emirates are reported to have bombed with their aircraft some of the groups inside Libya. I don't believe that Egypt will forever be restrained. If the situation in Libya gets even worse, then neighboring countries, maybe even Algeria, might decide that it has to do something to protect its own security. And I think, therefore, we need to be talking to the countries in North Africa to see if there is a way that we can collectively, as has been said, deal with these problems, because Libya is not just important in terms of the destabilization of countries in Africa, it is also a conduit, a source of instability elsewhere in Europe. And the people who are coming across from Eritrea, or people who are going from, even from Asia, are being smuggled through the smuggling routes into southern Europe and potentially into other European Union countries. We need to create some kind of stability in Libya, and that requires international cooperation with North African countries.
Grazie.
Thank you. Over to Mr. Dimesh Malta.
Signor Presidente, vorrei anzitutto.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I would like to thank you for your remarks. You gave us a very clear picture of the situation in Libya. And in particular, I would like to state at the outset that I fully agree with your message, i.e. we must be in the front line, and that Libya matters a lot to Europe. And I'm going to now switch to English, which is the second official language in Malta.
The closest European Union country to Libya, the situation is of immediate concern. We were there for the Libyan people at their moment of crisis. We were there when the Gaddafi regime was being toppled. We were also serving as a humanitarian bridge for the people that needed to use Malta to cross to safer pastures. And we shall continue to extend that solidarity. Because, as I believe has also been pointed out correctly by Ana Maria Gomez from the European Parliament, this has been a people's revolution. But it is a people's revolution which we need to safeguard. And what has happened yesterday is obviously a situation that creates more political instability. Because the ruling that the democratically elected parliament is unconstitutional, a ruling given by Libya's Supreme Court, if I understand correctly, because the court said that the body that had overseen the laws that governed the election had not been properly appointed, is one which clearly needs to be evaluated. As has been pointed out already by one of the members of parliament of the Tobruk government, what weight can one give to a ruling when Tripoli is hijacked? But whether one agrees or not with that sentiment, the circumstances of the ruling certainly need to be examined. Reference has been made here earlier to oil production in Libya. Well, another development, sad development yesterday was, of course, the attack on a major production facility in Shara Izandi, which was stormed, and that meant the closure of that facility. The Economist, in its feature of November 1st, referred to what it called the surreal nature of Libya's politics. 2 prime ministers, 2 parliaments, including the General National Council, a self-declared government by the oil minister of the country, all situations which are certainly of preoccupation. But my appeal to all colleagues in these circumstances is we need to be there for Libya. We need to be there for Libya because we could easily say that now it is a question of self-determination. But the truth is that instability there is not only a factor for concern to North Africa and to the Mediterranean, but is a factor of concern to all of Europe. And therefore, as European Union, we do now have a duty to keep safeguarding, looking into the situation, and act to promote also the values that we believe in, not least that the matter can only be resolved through political dialogue and not through any military solution.
Grazie.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Nart, European Parliament.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. If metaphysical politics confronts reality, it's a shameful reality. And if I say this, it's because I've listened to something that, quite frankly, has left me surprised. My friend Bernardino Leon has left to Libya because of the sentence of the Supreme Court. And what I would like to ask is, what Supreme Court are we talking about? In Libya, there's no institutions. The main argument that they have is the caliber of the guns that they're using. I mean, let's not tell stories. In Libya, there are no institutions. In Libya, we have a parliament in Tripoli. We have a new parliament in Tobruk. They're all purely philosophical, and we have tribal realities in the area. That's the reality. If what we want is to carry out a wonderful exercise, academic exercise, as to what the political metaphysics are that are present in Libya, well, that's fantastic, but it won't take us anywhere. The true fact in Libya is that we have tribes that function through the sheikhs, through the main leaders that at this time, and this is the most serious part of the whole thing, are being overrun by militias that are being controlled by young leaders that have money and therefore have power. And they'll end up by eliminating the moral strength of tribal leaders. Let's speak of the Libyan reality, not of the metaphysical superstructure, political superstructure, which might be very interesting to analyze here, but that does not exist in Libya. In Libya, there's an apparent confrontation between East and West, but in the East, there's also another problem, where we have the integrists which have nothing to do with the rest of the country. So in Libya, there's also another problem, because what we see is, for example, Kobane, but you don't see the internal conflict nor the tragedy that's actually taking place in the Islamic State. We see the north of Libya, and in the south, there's a problem in the north, and there's a problem in the south as well, between the Suwiya and the Tubus, between the different tribes, between the Zawiya and the people in the north, for the control of the oil in Diallo. And that leads us to something that is very interesting. The war is financed with money. Money and money. And that money comes from oil. And that oil is sold. And that oil is not sold by the Ministry of the Economy or by the Ministry of Oil. No, it's sold by the militias. And who buys that oil? To a great extent, we are the ones that are purchasing that oil. We are the ones that are buying that oil. Where are the controls of the European Union, of the governments of the European Union, controlling the oil that is financing the militias? Now, let's stop telling strange stories. And let's get on with it. Another point, there will not be an agreement in Libya without the social consensus, which is the tribal consensus. And there will not be a solution in Libya unless there is a presence of external actors, Algeria, Egypt, and Chad. And we will not be able to do anything if there is no control of the Libyan frontiers, for which Chad and Niger are absolutely fundamental, because what we're doing is we're seeking help from the Chad army to solve the problems in Mali, and with the aid of strategic aid of France. But it's fundamental that that corridor of Boko Haram, which connects Nigeria to Libya, be stopped through the control of the Niger and Chad frontiers. That's why it's important to have the presence of the Niger and the Chad armies. And everything else is very nice story and pure rhetoric, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Amendola, Italy. Thank you, Chairman. I believe that in order to go ahead with your proposals and the proposals put forward by Bernardino León, we have to do what Ana Gomes has said. We have to be realistic and recognize that we are faced with the results of our failure. Why do I speak about failure? Because after the Arab revolutions, our intention was to rearm, let's say, countries such as Libya, but we made the biggest mistake since the Second World War. We created a route of terror which unites Europe and Africa, the Sahel and the coasts of Sicily. We built a corridor of insecurity for 6 million Libyans, but above all, in the region, we have seen the repercussions of the mistakes we've made in other parts of the Middle East and North Africa, such as in Syria. It's a proxy war where regional elements develop their solutions disregarding our debates. This is a network of insecurity and terror that cuts across the Mediterranean, unites Africa, and represents a source of terror and death from Syria to Iraq. That is the truth of the matter. Let us do away with the hypocrisies that have characterized our position in the past. To support Bernardino León and Federica Mogherini today means making available all possible solutions, from reconciliation to support in favor of the reorganization of the Libyan state and the military, knowing full well that the situation prior to the war was that of a tribally divided, ethnically divided country. But these ethnic groups and militia groups are rich, armed, and have no intention of surrendering their weapons. So we know that in Italy, we are faced with the humanitarian tragedy of so many who flee through Libya to come to Europe, not just to Italy, but to flee the war. And we have to understand that this is the result of Europe's failed foreign policy. We must support the plea put forward by Bernardino León and Federica Mogherini. We have to look at the geopolitics of Europe. If Europe wants to be a global player, it must tackle the conflict at its borders, such as the Mediterranean situation, which has become explosive. We can't just look one way. We have to solve regional problems to be global players, and Libya is a paradigm of the situations because of the proxy war, because of the combined effects of terrorism, money, and territorial occupation. National reconciliation, the proposals put forward by Chairman Latorre are sensible, but these must invite us to act and not just discuss, because Libya is the top priority for our continent. Thank you.
Varemenos.
Mr. Varemenos, Greece.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Italian colleagues for the hospitality. And second, allow me to fully agree with President Cassini, who told yesterday morning in the beginning of this event that Europe should have social harmony and political soul. I think that without these conditions, Europe cannot shape a future in a long-term way. We need a stable Europe in a stable environment as it is possible. In my opinion, it's need to fulfill the gap in the societies inside the countries' members, and second, between the groups of European state members. This evolution can bring a real stability in the Union. Let me also underscore that what happens nowadays in North Africa tends to be a long, heavy winter and a political process of political desertion. With tragedies such as in Syria and states without state as Libya, with millions of people fleeing to Europe. And one question remains without response. This problem is an Italian, Maltese, and Greek, or is a European one? We should share the burden of this problem or to let in other shoulders. Do we need a battle group in order to help the people who die in the sea? Another question is waiting for a response, even after the presentation of Mrs. Mogherini, who did not find just one word about this. The question is that the Turkish action in Cyprus economic zone, in an independent state member of European Union, is a problem which concerns Europe or not. Europe is a partner regarding to her members, or it is a third player. Europe has borders, and which are these? Which are? I think that such a question should be answered in order to deepen the real unity in the Union and to drive in a common sense for building up a real common foreign and defense policy. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Castaldo, European Parliament. And this is the last request for the floor. Thank you very much, Chairman. Dear colleagues, the situation in Libya is more serious now than it has ever been. The so-called Supreme Court has declared last June's elections as invalid. We have an interim government. It is a government that was appointed by a national council that is no longer in power, and we continue to witness clashes between the various tribes and militia groups, as our colleague Nat pointed out. We should not fool ourselves. We can discuss at length on the legitimacy or lack thereof of this ruling. We could also talk about the Operation Dawn and other groups that are controlling some parts of Libya. That would be useless. The thing is that the Tobruk vessel has floundered once and for all. We know that crude oil production is increasing. Sorry, says the speaker. Prices of oil are dropping on account of the crisis, on account of the Saudi policy. Even though this could be potentially convenient for us in Europe, this could potentially jeopardize the balance of forces in Libya, and this could be detrimental to the state of security of the country and have consequences for us as well. We have to turn the situation into a political opportunity. We have to correct past failures and spare no effort as individual member countries and as a union acting together to put an end to arms trafficking, and we have to sanction states or individuals who finance and support the different factions. We should even threaten a blockade on oil imports to ensure that we can sit at a table to initiate negotiations and lead to new, inclusive, transparent, fair elections in order to put an end to the tragedy that we're seeing in the Mediterranean, that common mass grave. Over 160,000 migrants have crossed, thousands have lost their lives, and this is a tragedy that concerns Europe as a whole from north to south, and we should never forget this. We have to face our responsibilities squarely because our time is up. Thank you. I don't know whether Mr. van der Mellen, Belgium, is back or not. No. At this point, we can end the debate here. Obviously, I am in no position to draw conclusions. All I can do is to take note of one fact. I think that it was the right decision to hold this session so as to have an exchange of views. Many delegates have said in their remarks that we should no longer fool ourselves and be delusional, which means that that has been the case in the past. And in so doing, the risk is that the consequences of this approach will be truly catastrophic. So we cannot afford to miss the opportunity that we're given to try and compensate for serious mistakes that have been made in the past and to make up for our failures and shortcomings. I think the circumstances are such that this is achievable, and I would like to add that we must absolutely do this because if we fail to solve the crisis in Libya, this is going to have a severe impact on us all. Nobody will be spared and the consequences of this tragedy. And I say this because, unfortunately, over the years, European countries have acted autonomously, driven by legitimate national interests, but without the awareness of a strategic perspective that Europe as a whole must share. So the final conclusions will make reference to this matter in very clear terms. We will use our debate to make sure that our parliaments are made aware of these sensitive issues. As we were talking, I was reading the Reuters report according to which the US is autonomously considering further sanctions to condition developments in the country and to try and encourage all stakeholders to reach a political solution. The European Union, I think, will have to continue to address this matter. I believe that the High Representative's address yesterday is encouraging. I think that we all agree on the need to be prepared to support any initiative whatsoever. This is because we have to be ready to support political initiatives, and in so doing, we must make sure that all of our operational resources are made available in support of this political process. And I'm sure that this will be discussed under the aegis and coordination of the High Representative. I would like to end here. Thank you all for your contributions, and I would like to officially close the fourth session and hand over to Chairman Vito for the closing session. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, I do believe that in the past few days we've had the opportunity to work exceptionally, and we are now about to conclude our interparliamentary conference. We are going to consider proposals that have been tabled to amend the rules of procedure. You know that we included best practices, and these best practices were drawn up in prior sessions of the conference, and they are now being adopted and included, therefore, in the final document. So I think that this is now complete, and this is an effort that has required a great deal of work, even in prior conferences, on the part of the different delegations. On the conclusions of the conference, as you know, Under our rules of procedure, we are required to submit draft conclusions as the presidency of the EU Council, and we've taken into account the amendments tabled by the different delegations. And, as we've announced, the presidency, in agreement with the Troika, has submitted a new conclusion document in order to take into account most of the amendments tabled by the delegations. And we again gave you all the opportunity to table new amendments to this additional draft. Some clarifications were made, and I believe that we should take those into consideration now. And I'm sure you'll all agree that in future meetings, the conclusions should focus on essential matters relevant to common foreign and security policy and security and defense policy. We will now have the conclusions of the 3 breakout sessions that were scheduled this morning, and we will have the rapporteurs, the first being Mr. Artini. I would invite you to come up to the table, as well as the other rapporteurs, of course. So Mr. Artini will report back on the first breakout session, which focused on the future of EU battle groups. The floor is yours. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, colleagues and representatives of all national parliaments and the European Parliament. As a member of Parliament, I would like to give you an idea of the debate that we've had up to now, and as a conclusion, I would draw your attention on how to overcome some of the issues that came up in today's discussion as well. And this is also to follow up the request made by the High Representative, Mrs. Mogherini. She's asked us all to contribute to strengthening this instrument. The battle groups is an issue that was widely debated in the European parliamentary system. So I'm referring here to national parliaments, to this conference. This is where the debate has been held. On the 12th of September, the European Parliament approved a resolution on the current status of European military structures and future prospects. And we know that the European Union is now unable to react to international crises, and this is why this effort is necessary. What are some of the remedies that are being considered? Well, the European Parliament asked to strengthen the EU battle groups, and this is a capability that is limited and that hasn't been used as envisaged in the Helsinki goals of 1999. So the debate has focused on the possible use of these battle groups and a revision of the Athena financing mechanism. The European Council of December 1920 of 2013 reiterated the invitation to improve the EU rapid reaction capability, to improve the flexibility and the deployability of these battle groups, and to review and revise, therefore, the Athena mechanism. And in the Athens Interparliamentary Conference that was held on April 3rd and 4th, this year, an ad hoc working group, upon proposal of the Dutch delegation, considered in detail some of these issues. We know that we have different national practices and procedures, and we know that there are different consequences at national and European levels, and the funding mechanism that is used in NATO, and maybe that could be a possible model for the EU battle groups as well. Operational costs, sharing procedures in the member states that are participating in the battle groups, and so on and so forth. And at that same conference, the High Representative quite rightly invited parliaments, and in particular the presidency after the Greek presidency. He invited them to work on a new name for battle groups so as to have positive and constructive names based on a comprehensive European approach. So national parliaments were encouraged to pursue this debate, and this is what we've done today. In this exchange, the Dutch parliamentary delegation contributed substantially. In fact, last July 16th, they produced a document on EU battle groups, use them or lose them. And this clearly defines the state of the debate and the principal issues. There is no clear-cut European political will. There are different national decision-making procedures in deploying military forces. And then what about the financial costs, which are typically borne by the participating member states? And the chairs of the Italian Foreign Affairs Committee and Defense Committee promoted on the 9th of October a seminar in order to go into these matters before the conference today, to come up with, to be able to take stock of the situation and come up with some clear ideas. We heard a number of high-level presentations today, and we had a very lively debate. It is difficult for a common foreign and defense policy to be established from a political standpoint, and we know that there are different strategic cultures in the 28 member states of the EU, which is why it is difficult at times to make these decisions in terms of the use of these groups. It is important to have a unanimous decision, and the nations that are involved, that are supplying standby forces, need to be available in order for these decisions to be made. And this is what has been lacking hitherto. These are some requirements that have not been met. Another issue is having troops that report to the EU directly. This appears to be a duplication of NATO in some respects. And the Athena financing mechanism does not enable the deployment of battle groups because they are not able to finance the deployment of these battle groups with the union budget. The fund would cover logistical and operational costs, and all the other operational costs of the troops would be borne by the countries that are supplying the troops. In this connection, the NATO financing mechanism may not be considered to be a good model because it is based on the principle costs lie where they fall. So each state has to pay for its troops. And this goes against the EU principle of shared costs, where even member states that don't participate actively would incur some of the costs. And we also discussed the need to broaden the tasks assigned to the battle groups and perhaps to increase their size, and to perhaps include training and mentoring capabilities. So there are issues that have to be dealt with, but we can say that battle groups cannot be forsaken if we want to be able to quickly react to crises and implement a European security strategy. They are an essential tool in order to ensure interoperability among states. And it is a good vehicle which will perhaps enable the creation of a European military instrument, as was underscored by our Spanish colleague. And it should be able to resolve European interests or problems. As members of Parliament, we have to be aware that there is an underlying issue in connection with battle groups. We need democratic control. These are important instruments for national sovereignty. So we need a supranational political system in order to have a European common defense policy. Sovereignty sharing means democratic control. So our common policies are based on an intergovernmental rationale, and sovereignty sharing and funding are issues that have to be renegotiated and updated all the time. But at the same time, European Parliament and national parliaments, through these kinds of conferences, can play a proactive role. It is possible, therefore, to acknowledge and develop potentials that are provided through these efforts that we are all involved in. So maybe the European Union is still quite a young actor when it comes to security and defense matters, but it is a situation that we can definitely improve. By pursuing and establishing these policies, Europe will take on more authority and credibility. I think we need to have more debates of this kind. We need to have an exchange of information and experience on battle groups, because this way we can continue to discuss these matters even in Riga, for example, in the Interparliamentary Conference. And we should be able to continue, therefore, discussing what possible solutions we might adopt in the future. We have different constitutional systems when it comes to security and defense policies, but we have to be well aware of the operational modes of battle groups, of decision-making processes, of how they can be deployed, and of the crisis areas where they can be deployed. We need a better understanding in order to improve the overall mechanism. Of course, we also have issues pertaining to political will and to funding mechanisms. We have to be able to establish new funding mechanisms and planning timetables. Currently, we have a 5-year timetable. We talked earlier about the Afghan fatigue. We need to consider that member states can get together to create a stabilization and a rapid reaction force. This might be a new name, maybe, for the battle groups, but it's just an idea. It's not the only possibility. In any case, we need this to make sure that we can intervene promptly in case of threat or crisis. We think that this is, in general, a good mechanism that can be an important deterrent in case of crisis. It can ensure a timely reaction. We've also got to consider better flexibility and more ease of deployment of these troops. We have to broaden the tasks of the battle groups. That's another idea that came up, and I mentioned it earlier. So we have to consider training, mentoring, support. We know that in many instances there is a high degree of instability, so this is the kind of approach that is needed. Maybe we could have an external independent authority, the European Defence Agency, for example, overseeing this whole effort. So we need to better coordinate the defence policies of member states, and we need to focus on the opportunities provided by Article 44 of the European Union Treaty. We talked about structured cooperation. Our French colleague mentioned this. This is a very useful normative platform which will help us to identify any improvements that would enable us to deploy our battle groups. Thank you.
Ascoltiamo.
Thank you very much. And now we will hand over to Mr. Afzal Khan, the rapporteur of the breakout session on regional stability and enlargement to the Western Balkans. Over to you, Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chairman, we had an excellent session with good engaging contribution by the participants. Western Balkan engagement has been a success story compared with where we are 20 years ago, even in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Just compare with what is happening in the rest of the EU neighborhood, both in East and South. The future of Western Balkan is within the European Union. Participants acknowledge the new President of the European Commission stated position of no more new members in the next 5 years. But it means we should focus on negotiations and hard work for implementing the agreed reforms. We need to understand the transformative power of enlargement, and we should not allow states feeling of being in permanent waiting room. We need to ensure that during the next 5 years, Western Balkan countries get ready for the next big step forward, and we must actively encourage them to adopt and implement the necessary reforms. Therefore, the EU needs an active enlargement strategy that keeps the countries firmly engaged and that promotes and strengthens the accession process in the Western Balkans. Particularly, we want to maintain our influence over the democratization and stabilization process. This requires measures that convince Western Balkan governments and societies of the political and economic benefit of European integration. EU measures will also have to contribute towards creating not only the political, but also the economic and social conditions for EU accession. Candidates and potential candidates, countries that have not started their negotiations yet must not be left behind. Otherwise, it could risk dividing the Western Balkans even further. We need to accelerate the process to strengthen social, political, and economic stability and democracy in the region. Germany and UK initiative and yesterday High Representative declared position of Balkan being priority was welcomed. We need to help strengthen regional cooperation in the Western Balkans, as good neighborly relations are the cornerstone of European integration. We need also to support initiatives highlighting stronger focus on regional cooperation. EU should play a more active role in mediating and promoting reconciliation and dialogue between people from conflicting countries. We also expect the countries in the region to cooperate and work together in this regard. The European integration will only be successful if EU accession and the related reforms will be perceived by the citizens both in the EU and in the Western Balkan countries as political, economic, and social progress, and will thus meet their support. Given the importance of the Western Balkans for the very foundation of the EU's foreign policy, disengagement by the EU from the enlargement perspective for the remaining Western Balkan country is therefore simply not an option. We just need to ask what prospect this leaves for EU in its global role if it cannot deal with its own region. Change has to come, and we in the EU need to ensure that change to be positive and for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. And now the floor goes to Mr. Manousos Salturos, who is the rapporteur for the breakout session on strengthening EU-Africa relations. Over to you.
La ringrazio, onorevole Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman.
Dear colleagues, the subject of the second working group was EU-Africa relations. Mr. Giovanni Carbone of the University of Milan presented an overview of economic, social, and political changes in the sub-Saharan Africa and its implications for Europe. Mr. Carbone noted that the sub-Saharan Africa is the fastest changing region, mainly due to the sustained economic boom, the massive demographic expansion, and the relative political stabilization, which does not exclude though new challenges and crises. Regarding the economic boom, Mr. Carbone noted that in Africa will be, in fact, the 6th of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. The growing opportunities for trade and investments in Africa have renewed the interest of all partners of the region and provoked a growing interest of emerging countries such as China. Many of these partners are organizing country-continent conferences to discuss their policies in Africa. Relations between the EU and Africa has become among the EU's top political priorities, as it was pointed out by a number of EU leaders, especially in the field of trade and energy. The sign of the Economic Partnership Agreement and the Ebola crisis are the key developments in 2014 regarding EU-Africa relations. A massive demographic expansion in the coming years is expected to have multiplied changes, namely regarding population pressures and conflicts over resources, fast and vast urbanization and migrations. It may also be a great opportunity. The young workforce of Africa can be an opportunity for Europe's aging societies. As far as the political stabilization is concerned, the statistics show that coups d'etat and civil wars are becoming less frequent and multi-party elections more common. But new crises with important implications are affecting stability in the region. Crises are geopolitically more concentrated. There are hotspots of global jihadism with increased relevance to EU security, such as the Horn of Africa, and well-known state fragility problem, which need to be addressed also through economic growth, development, and integration to increase stability. Mr. Cohen Vervaeke of EEAS pointed out that Africa is indeed important for the EU. The Europe-Africa relations are very deep, but also complex, and the two parts share great history. At a political level, the Cotonou Agreement and the Joint Africa-EU strategy are the main frameworks for EU-African relations. The EU has currently 48 representations in the sub-Saharan Africa, which is indicative to the growing involvement in the region. Mr. Vervaeke also referred to the EU-Africa conference that took place in Brussels this year, as well as the business forum that preceded it, which focused mainly to peace, prosperity, and the people, and the growing economic opportunities in the region. He underlined the importance of the rule of law, democratization, and good governance to create a stable environment that would make further development feasible, and pointed out that the sub-Saharan region should be included in the broader context of the neighboring policy, especially due to the interlinked developments in terrorism. He concluded it by saying that more focus should be given to economy, security, and values, and underlined that if we want to be effective in Africa, we should implement a comprehensive approach. On the CSDP, he mentioned that Africa has been a laboratory for EU with currently 9 missions deployed. On the debate that followed, the issue of staying focused on our Europe values was raised and underlined by many colleagues. The extended corruption in the region was of great concern to all of us, but we shared our optimism on that matter, that time is needed and time will have. And the climate change and its effect in security, as well as the importance of job creation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
L'abbiamo fatto. Allora.
And now we have concluded the feedback session with the reports by the three rapporteurs, whom I thank, as I thank all those who participated in the breakout sessions. And now we can move on to our final session. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the rules conference conclusions. The adoption of the rules is going to be submitted to the Conference of Chairpersons, which will take place in Rome in April 2015. The draft conclusions that have been circulated are not final because this text does not include the proposed amendments that were tabled yesterday. Going back to the rules of procedure, I would like to commend the previous presidencies for the hard work done, and in particular I would like to thank our Greek colleagues for having successfully contributed to finalising this drafting. I will now consider as adopted the rules as drafted, including best practices. I would like to stress that these best practices are also specifically mentioned under item 24 of the draft conclusions that we can now read.
Group on the rules of procedure for concluding its work and states that the best practice represent a further elaborating of the rules of procedure for the future proceeding of the conference. Con questa.
And with this inclusion in this final draft, we can consider this part of our business done. With regard to the draft conclusions, we have to wait for about 5 minutes before the final version is circulated. I don't know whether the Latvian presidency would like to. Oh no, we'll just stop for 5 minutes so that they can print the final conclusions.
Allora, colleghi.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I must apologize for this delay, which was due to a problem with the printing process. And this is due to the fact that we were doing our utmost to include all of the contributions submitted by the various delegations. And this is why I think that in the future the conclusions should be as brief as possible, also so as to enable the various delegations to be able to read the document rapidly and make any amendments. We submitted under Article 7, Paragraph 2 of our Rules of Procedure a draft as indicated in the best practices approved by the working group, taking into account the amendments that were received prior to the opening of the conference. Yesterday, we circulated a draft document that included most of the proposed amendments. As far as that version was concerned, additional requests to make amendments were received, and the text that you have just received incorporates most of the proposed amendments in agreement with the Troika. Consequently, the new draft that has just been circulated also includes the new proposed amendments that were submitted following yesterday's draft version. We have one question that remains to be discussed as far as the chair is aware, and I'm referring to a request put forward by the British delegation, whereby paragraph 15 bis would be deleted. And in the new draft, this had been included pursuant to a request put forward by the German delegation. Pursuant to our rules of procedure for our interparliamentary conference, firstly, I would like to ask my friends and colleagues from the German delegation whether they insist on the inclusion of paragraph 15 bis.
Prego.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we were very pleased that the presidency and the Troika, as well as the colleagues of the European Parliament, had taken up Germany's proposal, had changed the wording a bit, and of course we also had a couple of other proposals as to how to formulate this. We had obtained a consensus on the part of all delegations with the exception of a single delegation. And we just had a consensual approach, and the answer of this delegation, of said delegation, is niet, and that is really regrettable, because at this conference we're talking about strengthening the European security and defense policy, and a lot has been said concerning this objective, and if we cannot obtain any improvement and propose any improvement for the institutions, then most of it will remain just that, dead letter on paper. And therefore we do insist the European Union needs to have the necessary means in order to exert the right form of pressure. So if the said delegation will continue with by saying niet, then we certainly don't want to contribute to a failure of this conference by insisting on our wording. But we do wish to stress that if we cannot include it in these conclusions, then it will have to be put back on the agenda at the next conference, and at some point our friends from Great Britain will simply not be able to maintain their line. And I stress that simply because UKIP doesn't want a strengthening of the European Union, we do not want to relinquish or forgo our proposal. But of course, we do not want to stand in the way of a successful conclusion of this conference. So if we can So if it all hinges on the position of a single delegation, then we simply have to accept it. Or accept the fact as it is.
I would like to thank the German delegation, our colleague Mr. Batis. So we can, at this point, decide that the matter can be addressed again at the conference in Riga. And this would also be in line with the request put forward by the British delegation, which has the floor now.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think we want to be absolutely clear that this paragraph is being withdrawn from the text. And if it is, then we can support the text. We cannot support it within the text. But I must just reply to one comment from the German delegation. Our delegation is a cross-party delegation representing Liberal Democrat, Conservative and Labour members. It has nothing whatsoever to do with UKIP. There is a fundamental difference of view between the British approach and the German approach. We respect the German position, but we don't agree with it. This is not a decision-making body, and we actually argued that we shouldn't even try to come to conclusions. We thought the original text from the presidency was well drafted to reflect consensus that existed. We think it's inappropriate to try and develop a consensus that doesn't exist. This is not the body for doing it, and indeed a lot of time is taken up which in our view would be better spent debating the issues which have brought us here and exchanging views with each other, rather than trying to make decisions which are properly those for councils of ministers, governments, heads of governments, and ultimately treaties. So our view is that the text without this paragraph is acceptable, has a consensus and has our support. But I think it must be understood that we believe that if this is going to be the process at these conferences time after time, it's inappropriate, and we feel it takes time away from much more useful exchange of views, which we value very much.
Colleagues, I think that we can be satisfied with the result of our meeting as is testified by the quality of the different speeches and contributions. Do other delegations wish to take the floor on the subject of the draft conclusions? If not, we can consider the document as adopted, and I would like to now call on the representative of the Latvian delegation to take the floor. As you know, Latvia is going to host the next conference in Riga, and I would like to invite the representative of the Latvian delegation to address the meeting, renewing my thanks to all colleagues. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank the Italian presidency for what has been, I think, a successful, very well-run and constructive conference, and we will do our best in Riga on March 4th through 6th to follow in this spirit. I also want to mention to all the delegates that just this week Latvia approved a new parliament and also a new government. In fact, I left right after the parliament and the government were approved. The good news is that both the parliament and the government continues to be ruled by a coalition that was preparing for the presidency, so that the policies will be in place. I think this is good news for Latvia. It's also good news for the presidency, that things will consistently move ahead. And finally, as odd as this may sound, I want to thank you for the weather, because I think this means you won't be very disappointed when you come to Riga in March and experience Baltic sea weather. Maybe we can improve, but we will do our best. So again, I look forward to seeing all of you in Riga on the shores of the Baltic Sea, on the northern part of the European Union, and I hope we can have an equally constructive, or perhaps even more so, meeting there. Thank you very much.
La ringrazio, signor Presidente.
Thank you, and I too am sure that we will be received very well in Riga, and I hope that despite this rainy weather, you have had the opportunity of appreciating the beauties of the city of Rome and of this venue. I am confident that in Riga we will continue to pursue our important objective, that of ensuring that we can promote the common foreign and security policy and the common security and defence policy. And now I would like to invite you to end our meeting with lunch that will be held in the Sala Garibaldi. Thank you so much to you all for having made this such a successful conference.